Hey folks, thanks for tuning in today. What would I do without you? The purpose of this video is to bring you some light entertainment as always, and a little bit of breaking news about Shaun Attwood and his sidekick. So as you can see by the title of the video, first of all, Shaun Attwood has in fact, according to himself at least, been questioned at a local police station and charged with a criminal offence. Not only that, the questioning officer was a child protection officer for some reason. Again, this is according to Mr. Attwood's own telling of the incident, so it may be another prank, perhaps, but we'll look into it in a moment. So we're going to cover that, and we're also going to talk about the aforementioned sidekick threatening to pay me a visit for daring to talk about him and Mr. Attwood. So very nice, normal behaviour there. First of all though, if you enjoy this content and you believe that the spotlight should remain trained firmly upon this clownery, then please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Subscribing to this channel, it not only increases the reach of the channel, but it has the added benefit of trolling Shaun Attwood and triggering his sidekick, because Mr. Attwood does like to call this a troll channel, motivated by jealousy regarding his sex life apparently, which is actually something he said in reference to discussions surrounding that video in which an autistic brain damaged sex worker who went to his home to film a podcast ended up being filmed by Shaun Attwood on her knees, dressed as a little girl, unzipping his trousers and calling him daddy. I know I repeat this quite often, but it needs to be done because the magnitude of that shouldn't be understated and it shouldn't be swept under the rug, because Mr. Attwood claims to be an activist and he claims that this was all a prank. It's an autistic person we're talking about here, an autistic brain damaged person who suffered decades of abuse. Hopefully one day people will understand why that's not acceptable as a prank. But the fact that he said I'm jealous of it, jealous of his sex life apparently, it's so far wide of the mark that it might actually be the opposite of jealousy. I couldn't figure out what the word was for the opposite of jealousy, so the only way I can describe it is when I think of the fact that I am not Shaun Attwood, it just makes everything look a little bit more beautiful, everything brightens up a little bit, and I feel like I'm off the ground slightly. So if you want to seek enlightenment in life, if you just think to yourself, I'm not Shaun Attwood, that'll actually get you closer to enlightenment than any meditation could. So it's a pretty good practice. Now I'm certainly not here to troll Mr. Attwood, but if Mr. Attwood thinks I'm trolling him, then that has got to be worth a sub. And in return I will keep you updated of any slimy shenanigans which come to my attention, such as the one, in fact the two, that we're going to talk about today. So first of all, the main event of today's video is that Mr. Attwood has said that he has submitted to questioning at a police station and was then charged with a criminal offence, and that the police officer who questioned him was a child protection officer. Not only that, apparently this child protection officer usually deals with paedophiles, so was shocked to find himself dealing with someone whose mission it is to protect children. I'm not joking, that is what Mr. Attwood said, and I'm going to play the audio just now. It came to me via an anonymous source. It's either part of a live stream or it's something that he announced to patrons, which means that he has announced it to a section of his audience, which means it is in the public domain. Now just because it's from Patreon doesn't mean that it's not covered under fair use. Commentary and criticism is always covered under fair use as long as it's justifiable. Even commentary and criticism on Hollywood blockbusters, for example, is covered under fair use. This is also covered under fair use because it is in the public interest. I'm also not going to show the video, although I do have the video. I'm just going to show the audio because that's all I need to get the point across regarding this. And of course, I am posting it to allow it to be scrutinised due to Mr. Attwood's position as a self-styled sexual abuse activist and protector of children. Please also remember that all my videos are backed up on Odysee, so if anything happens to this channel, you'll be able to get me on Odysee. But let's play this clip just now.
Some of you know I was called into the police station in London, and this is because of what one of my activist podcast guests said on my YouTube channel when I was interviewing her that pertained to a sexual abuse case and certain names getting mentioned. Anyway, fortunately, the policeman who interviewed me, he's part of child protection. He's normally interviewing paedophiles and predators, so he was quite shocked that someone whose mission it is to protect kids and end the war on drugs was sat on the other side of the interrogation table. So he was recommending a caution, but it was out of his hands, he said. It was in the hands of CPS, Crown Prosecution Service, who for some reason is pursuing it aggressively.
So that's the recording. Let me know down in the comments what you make of it. I find it to be a very interesting development indeed. It's obviously quite a recent development for Mr. Attwood. I don't know if he was actually arrested, because the way he says it, it sounds as if he attended the interview voluntarily, although we all know that if you don't attend a voluntary police interview, you may well be arrested, but that's another story. But he certainly does say that he was charged, and he says that the Crown Prosecution Service are being quite aggressive with the pursuit of the charge. So that is certainly very interesting in my opinion. It's clearly a contempt of court issue. But I just don't know why a child protection officer would be the one interviewing him. I understand that the case involves a child apparently, but I don't understand why it would actually be a child protection officer that's questioning Mr. Attwood. Maybe that is just how it works, who knows. Now, just because he was actually charged as well, it's probably worth pointing out that just because you're charged does not mean you're guilty. I know people are actually aware of this, of course, but it is worth repeating and mentioning, because just because you've been charged, it does not mean that you're guilty. So Shaun Attwood has not committed a crime just because he's been charged here. That will need to be decided in court. He's either admitted to it or he's going to plead not guilty. So we'll see how it goes. Now, whether you believe what he said about the police officer wanting to pursue a caution instead, that's up to you. I know what I find extremely difficult to believe, and that is that the police officer was in any way, shape or form shocked that he was facing someone whose mission it is to end the war on drugs and protect children, as Mr. Attwood says. I just find that so unlikely as to be quite likely impossible, that the police officer was blindsided by Mr. Attwood's presence and shocked because Mr. Attwood's mission is to protect children. I think this child protection officer will have very likely just seen Mr. Attwood for what he is, which is a YouTuber with previous convictions for drugs, serious drugs convictions. Which gets me on to my next point. So in the last few days, myself and Wheezy of the What Is Truth podcast, link below, we've been variously threatened in live chats and DMs and things like this. We've been threatened with things such as being reported to the police, with being reported to action fraud, with being tracked down and exposed, with having our channels taken down. We've had false copyright strikes filed against our joint podcast channel, the Daddygate channel, link also below to that. And I've also been accused of selling Class A drugs to children. All this for talking about this murky situation and things that are linked to it. And you wonder why certain other people on YouTube have made their excuses and bowed out of talking about Mr. Attwood. It's actually hard to blame them for doing that. But all these threats are coming from one person, not Mr. Attwood himself, but Mr. Attwood's cameraman, a wedding photographer who goes by the username Underground on YouTube. I don't know whether he's doing this on behalf of himself or on behalf of Mr. Attwood, so I'm not saying that Shaun Attwood sent him to do this, but it certainly does bring new perspective to remarks that were made earlier in the year from certain people who said that everyone who goes up against Shaun Attwood has an army of horrible creatures coming after them before long. And even that person himself has stopped talking about Shaun Attwood now. But as I say, this is actually coming from Shaun Attwood's sidekick, Underground, so it may just be that Underground has decided to do all this off his own back because he's upset and feeling emotional about the whole thing. Now, one of the things that he said to me in the live chat of the daddygate podcast the other day was that he's coming to my house. He said he's going to doorstep me, he'll come to my house, and I actually spoke to some people I know in relation to whether that is actually a threat or not, and it turns out that threatening to come to someone's door could well cross the line into criminality if it's a statement designed to cause fear and alarm, to put the recipient into a state of fear and alarm. You're not the BBC, you're not the press, and you don't actually get to tell people that you're going to track them down and come to their door, especially when you've just wrongly accused them moments earlier of being a complete scumbag who sold Class A drugs to children. Then saying you're going to come to my door, that could 100% be perceived as a threat. So you can certainly consider this me putting it on the public record that has been said. Imagine me saying to you, completely out of nowhere, that you've been selling drugs to children and I'm going to find out where you live and come to your door. That doesn't sound like anything other than a threat. There doesn't seem to be any legitimate reason to be saying that. And the funniest part is, Underground has actually said that he's called the police on Wheezy. So the guy is just all over the place. It's the moral high ground 1 second and below the belt shots the next, intimidation attempts the next, back to the moral high ground, claiming that he's getting bullied the next second. The guy's all over the place and it's not normal. And what is it with these people, anyway, bringing children into things for no reason at all? I mean, the accusation of selling drugs to children is a clear and deliberate smear, and I'll get into it in a second as to why it's a smear. But Underground, first of all, he's claiming that I'm a crack and heroin addict in his mid-40s who got 6 years back in 2018 for selling drugs in Aberdeen. Now, this is based on a news article, which I'll link below so you can read it for yourself. And by all accounts, the guy's quite well known in his local area. So I find the whole thing quite funny because obviously if I did have that kind of lifestyle, if I had that kind of background, I would just claim I was reformed and make videos about it. That's the way to get somewhere on YouTube these days. But as it stands, unfortunately for me, and unfortunately for Underground, I've got no criminal record whatsoever. Unlike Underground's friend, boss and mentor, Shaun Attwood, who has a lengthy criminal record, as we previously mentioned, whose rap sheet mentions drug dealing and also mentions minors. This is also a guy who casually mentions being questioned by child protection police officers. So for Underground to come out with "Chancer sold drugs to children," that's just flinging shit from their own corner onto others to see what sticks. It's dark and dingy, murky tactics. They're trying to throw their own shit at me to see if any sticks. And the reason that you know it's a deliberate smear by Underground, who is an employee of Shaun Attwood, remember, is that the very article he's referring to, which I have linked below, mentions nothing about selling drugs to children. Underground has literally just added children in. The story is about street level addicts selling drugs to street level addicts by the sounds of things. Selling crack and heroin's a bad enough smear, but why has Underground taken it upon himself to add children into the mix? It just shows, even more so, that it is designed to smear and provide the maximum emotional impact to anybody gullible that reads it casually. But it does just make me wonder why they keep bringing kids into things, these lot. We've got Callie, for no reason at all, dressed as a little girl. We've got Attwood, claiming that he's being questioned by child protection officers over a contempt of court issue. And now we've got Attwood's employee, Underground, adding children into a story which didn't contain children in order to attack me, who just happens to be one of their most vocal critics at the moment. It just makes you wonder, does Underground find the idea of children who are addicted to drugs funny? This is a documentary maker that we're talking about here, who makes documentaries about the abuse of children, among other things. Yet he's completely embellishing stories in a live chat to mislead an audience that children were involved in a story when they weren't. So I'll let you make your own minds up as to whether a documentary maker should be behaving in such a way, but I personally consider it to be very murky indeed. Props, of course, to the daddygate podcast audience, because the first reply to Underground when he mentioned this was, "Where's the evidence?" which is the bare minimum that anyone should be asking, but because it's so rare these days, it's worthy of respect. And there were several comments like that throughout the live chat, which I was quite pleased to see. Nobody took Underground's bullshit seriously. So I'm going to end the video here, but I just wanted to point all of that out to get it on the public record, because our freedom of speech is being eroded enough already around the world by our governments without us being intimidated by people who have no power trying to scare us so that we don't talk about information which is in the public interest, it's in the public domain, and it needs to be spoken about. So if you see people like this trying to intimidate other people into not speaking, first of all, consider how someone gets so comfortable behaving like that in the first place, because it really isn't normal behaviour, but also call it out. Ask them who the hell they think they are and make videos about it. Post about it on your social media, ask questions, condemn it, because there's no place for that kind of crap on YouTube, and there's no place for it in society either. So you can take your intimidation attempts and you can shove them up your arse, Underground. If you don't like it, don't tune in. And if you're opposed to something that's been said, if something that's been said is wrong, debunk it. Tell us how it's wrong. Making threats doesn't look as if you've got the truth on your side. Anyway, thanks to the people that have tuned in today. Please do subscribe. As I say, it helps support me in this situation that I find myself in. And it also annoys the hell out of the people who would just prefer that everybody just keeps their damn mouth shut, even though they've got absolutely no right to expect people to do that. Anyway folks, I will leave that there. So thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.
The policeman who interviewed me, he's part of child protection. He's normally interviewing paedophiles and predators, so he was quite shocked that someone whose mission it is to protect kids and end the war on drugs was sat on the other side of the interrogation table.